back to MindXMotive. Before we continue today's story, I need to say something. It's been 2 months since the last episode dropped, and if you've been following this case with me, you've probably noticed the silence. That's because I was deep in the chaos that every student in India knows far too well: board exams. But now that those are finally over, we're officially back. The episodes will be coming out much more regularly again. And honestly, there couldn't be a better case to come back with. Because today we're asking a different question. How does someone become a person like Charles Sobhraj? His social environment and how it made him the way he was. What kind of childhood creates someone who can manipulate people so easily, who can switch identities, who can gain trust, and then destroy lives without hesitation? This is episode 3 of the Charles Sobhraj case, and today we're diving into the social causes that made the Serpent that. The unstable childhood, the colonial identity crisis, the constant movement between cultures, the rejection, the manipulation, and the environments that helped shape one of the most infamous criminals of the 20th century. Because before the crimes, before the international manhunt, there was a boy named Charles Sobhraj. His story begins on April 6, 1944 in Saigon. Saigon in 1944 was not the peaceful tourist destination people imagine it as today. At the time, it was a part of French Indochina, a colonial territory controlled by France. War and political instability shaped daily life, and in the middle of this complicated world, Hotchand Bhavnani Gurmukh Sobhraj was born. His father was an Indian Sindhi businessman and his mother was Vietnamese. But their relationship was far from stable. They were never married, and Charles's father denied that he was ever his son. That rejection would become the first major fracture in Charles's childhood. Soon after, his mother remarried someone else, a French army lieutenant stationed in Indochina. And like that, Charles found himself growing up inside a completely new family. His name eventually appeared in church records as Charles Gurmukh Sobhraj in 1959. And even inside this new family structure, Charles never quite felt like he belonged. His stepfather and mother later had children together, and according to people who knew the family, Charles often felt neglected, overlooked, and less important than the other children. Some psychologists believe early rejection can shape a child's sense of identity. For Charles Sobhraj, that sense of not belonging would follow him everywhere. Charles' childhood was unstable in another way. His family moved constantly, back and forth between Southeast Asia and France. New schools, new cities, new languages. For most kids, this kind of movement can be confusing. For Charles, it became an opportunity. He learned how to adapt, how to blend in, how to observe people, and slowly he began to realize something. If you understand people enough, you can manipulate them just right. By the time Charles reached his teenage years, that manipulation began turning into crime. Nothing huge at first, just petty theft, small scams, breaking into places, testing the limits. But in 1963, things escalated. Charles committed burglary, and this time he was caught. He received his first prison sentence. He was sent to Poissy prison near Paris. Charles Sobhraj used his imprisonment as a training ground. Inside Poissy prison, something unusual happened. Charles didn't behave like other inmates. Instead of violence or anger, he used charm, spoke politely, built relationships, and flattered guards. This would slowly be the way that he escaped prison from India from the Tihar jail, which is one of the most secure facilities. Slowly and surely enough, he began to manipulate police officials. Before long, he was receiving special favors. extra privileges, even being allowed to keep books in his cell, something other prisoners didn't get. His ability to read people and gain trust would become one of the most defining features of his life. Around the same time, Charles met someone who would play an important role in his early story, a young wealthy man named Felix Decaune. Felix was a prison volunteer, kind, privileged, and completely fascinated by Charles. Charles had that manipulative effect on everybody. Felix became one of the first examples of how easily Charles could pull someone into his orbit with his lure and eclectic and magnetic aura. Eventually, Charles got parole, and after his release, he moved in with Felix. Now, suddenly, Charles had access to something he'd never fully experienced before: the high society of Paris, fancy apartments, wealthy social circles. But Charles knew he didn't belong there. And so, he did what he did best: he played a role. To some people, he was charming and sophisticated, to others, mysterious and exciting. But behind the veil, he was running scams, burglaries, fraud, and theft. He was moving between two worlds: the glamorous social elite and the dangerous criminal underworld. And somehow, he made both believe he belonged. During this time in Paris, Charles met a woman who became deeply involved in his life. Her name was Chantal Compagnon. Chantal came from a conservative Parisian family. She was young and inexperienced when it came to toxicity and completely captivated by Charles. He had charisma, riz if you will, the kind of personality that could draw people in quickly. The two began a romantic relationship, and before long, Charles proposed to her. But what happened next perfectly illustrates the chaotic life he was living. On the very same day he proposed, Charles was arrested. Police caught him driving a stolen vehicle while trying to evade them. He was sentenced to 8 months in prison, and surprisingly, Chantal stayed loyal to him. She supported him through the entire sentence, and once he was released, the two got married. By 1970, Charles had officially become a French citizen, but even with that stability, he couldn't escape his criminal habits. Authorities were watching him, and Charles knew that staying in France would eventually mean getting caught again. So he made a decision. He and Chantal would leave Europe entirely. The couple began traveling across Eastern Europe using fake documents, and along the way, they started targeting tourists. They would befriend travelers, gain their trust, then rob them. By the end of their journey, Charles and Chantal arrived in Bombay. And while they were there, Chantal gave birth to their daughter, a baby girl named Usha. But fatherhood didn't change Charles. Instead of settling down, he expanded his criminal activity. He moved on from petty theft and larceny to car theft, smuggling, and scams. Money began to flow in. But there was another problem developing. Charles was developing a serious gambling addiction. The gambling meant he always needed more money, which meant more crime. Slowly, this is what devolved into the entire pattern we've been covering the last two cases, all about his criminal activities, especially regarding killing all those tourists. And whenever he's asked the reason, all he would say is, "I'm not killing anyone good," which surely isn't a justifiable cause, right? But let's examine the exact reasons, the social causes that made him the way he was. When we take a closer look at the social influences surrounding Charles Sobhraj's life, a pattern starts to emerge. This wasn't just a story of a man who suddenly decided to become a criminal. It was the slow construction of a personality shaped by rejection, instability, and opportunity. Let's start with the most obvious factor: early rejection. Charles was born into a relationship where his parents were never married. His father openly denied that he was even his child. This initial and immediate rejection can have some powerful psychological implications. Psychologist John Bowlby argued in his attachment theory that early relationships with caregivers shape how children view the world. When children grow up feeling unwanted or emotionally neglected, they can develop insecure attachments, meaning they struggle to trust people or form genuine emotional bonds later in life. And when you look at Charles Sobhraj's life, that emotional detachment shows up again and again. He was able to gain people's trust easily and rarely seemed to feel any guilt when he betrayed them. Then there's the issue of identity. Charles grew up between multiple cultures: Vietnamese, Indian, and French. He moved constantly between Southeast Asia and France, new schools, new environments, new languages. According to developmental psychologist Erik Erikson, adolescence is a stage where people try to answer one major question: who am I? But for someone constantly shifting between cultures and social groups, that question becomes quite complicated. Instead of forming a stable identity, Charles learned something else entirely. He learned how to perform identities, with all of his stolen passports and identities, that is. For most people, identity is something they discover. For Charles Sobhraj, identity became something he constructed and pragmatically used as a crutch or an instrument. Another important influence was social learning. Psychologist Albert Bandura argued that people learn behavior by observing what works around them. And for Charles, manipulation clearly worked. In prison, charm got him privileges. With wealthy acquaintances, charisma got him money and shelter. With victims, trust got him access. Over time, deception wasn't just a tool, it became a strategy for survival. And there's also a broader sociological factor here. Sociologist Robert K. Merton proposed something called the strain theory, which suggests that when people feel disconnected from society, when they don't feel like they belong or can't access success through normal means, they sometimes create alternate paths. For Charles, crime became that alternative system, a new way to gain control, wealth, and power in a world where he felt like an outsider. So, when you combine all of these factors together, a rejected child, a fractured cultural identity, constant instability, and a lifetime of learning that manipulation works, you start to see how the foundation of someone like Charles Sobhraj was built. None of these factors excuse the behavior or the crimes that would come later, but they sure help us understand how a person like this can exist in the first place. Because before he became the Serpent, Charles Sobhraj was a child trying to find where he belonged. But instead of belonging anywhere, he learned how to exploit everything. And that brings us to the end of episode 3 of the Charles Sobhraj case. Thank you for sticking with me, especially after the 2-month break while I was drowning in board exams. And now that that chapter is over, we are officially back, and new episodes will be coming out more regularly. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to give you a small teaser of what's coming next on the podcast. The next case is going to be much closer to home for me. Little hint, I'm currently recording from Kolkata, and the next case I will be covering is the Kolkata House of Horrors. Ring any bells? Well, if it doesn't, you do not know what's coming for you or what will hit you. If you want to make sure you don't miss that, follow the podcast, share the episode, and keep your eye out for the next upload. This is MindXMotive, and I'm your host, Raya. Thank you for tuning in, and see you soon on the next episode. Just remember, at the end of the day, when the act is over, the mind remains.